I don't know when I first noticed it. Maybe it was the way her laughter seemed to drift away faster than before, or the way her eyes stayed glued to her phone a little too long during dinner. Jessica and I had been married for 7 years, and in that time, we'd built a life that felt stable, dependable, and ordinary. She taught art at the local school, and I ran a small woodworking shop that catered to a niche crowd of hobbyists and collectors. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was ours, and I thought we were content. Lately, though, something had shifted. It was subtle at first: missed calls, plans rearranged at the last minute, and vague answers to simple questions. I chalked it up to stress. Jessica was organizing a major art showcase at her school, and I figured the long hours and deadlines were getting to her. But then there was the trip. She announced it casually one evening, like it was no big deal. "It's a workshop," she said, stirring sugar into her tea, as though the words hadn't just hung in the air between us. "A few days away with other teachers to learn new techniques." I nodded, not thinking much of it. Jessica loved her work, and it made sense that she'd want to grow in her field. Still, something about the way she avoided my eyes as she spoke stayed with me. The night before she left, I helped her pack. She was unusually quiet, folding her clothes with a precision I'd never seen before. I tried making conversation, joking about how she'd finally get a break from my terrible cooking. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The next morning, I kissed her goodbye and watched her drive off, the taillights of her car disappearing down our street. The house felt emptier than usual, but I told myself it was just the quiet that came with being alone. 2 days passed uneventfully. I kept busy with orders at the shop, sanding down a custom oak cabinet for a client who insisted on perfection. In the evenings, I tinkered in the garage, working on a project I'd been putting off for months. Jessica called once, her voice light but distant, like she was speaking from a different world entirely. On the third day, I came home from work to find the mail piled high in the box. Sorting through it, I found a small package addressed to Jessica. I wasn't the type to snoop, but the name on the return label caught my attention. Someone named Ethan R. The name didn't ring a bell. Curiosity got the better of me, and before I knew it, I was staring at the unopened package on the kitchen counter. My mind spun through possibilities. A coworker? A former student? Someone from the workshop? I decided to ignore it, leaving the package where it was and heading to the garage to clear my head. But the next morning, as I drank my coffee, it was still there, sitting like a question I didn't want to ask. Jessica was due back that afternoon. When she arrived, her face was flushed, and her smile was brighter than it had been in weeks. She hugged me tightly, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined the distance between us. But then her eyes landed on the package. Her expression flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. She crossed the room quickly, snatching it up before I could say a word. "Oh, this is just something for the showcase," she said, her tone light but rushed. I didn't press her on it. I didn't have the words, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer if I did. Instead, I nodded and watched as she disappeared into the bedroom with the package clutched tightly in her hands. I told myself to let it go, that I was overthinking things. The days following Jessica's return were marked by a strange rhythm, like a song slightly off-key. She seemed busier than ever, spending long hours at school or locked away in her art room at home. I didn't ask her about the package again, though the memory of her reaction stuck with me like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. One evening, I decided to surprise her by cooking dinner, a rare occurrence, considering my skills barely extended beyond frying eggs and boiling pasta. I figured it might give us a chance to reconnect, to break through whatever invisible wall had grown between us. When she walked in, her eyes widened at the sight of the candles and the table set with my best attempt at chicken parmesan. "What's all this?" she asked, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "Just thought we could use a nice night in," I said, pulling out a chair for her. For a while, it felt like old times. We talked about her students, my latest projects at the shop, and even laughed about the neighbor's dog digging up our flower beds again. But as the conversation shifted, I noticed her deflecting certain questions, like when I asked about the workshop. "Oh, it was fine," she said, cutting her chicken into neat pieces. "Nothing too exciting, just a lot of lectures and practice. Did you meet anyone interesting?" I asked casually, though my heart picked up speed. She paused, just for a fraction of a second, before replying, "Not really. Just the usual crowd." Her answer seemed rehearsed, as though she'd been preparing it for days. I didn't press further, not wanting to ruin the evening. But as I cleared the plates and washed the dishes, my mind kept circling back to the name on that package. Later that night, while Jessica was in the shower, I found myself in her art room, a place I rarely ventured. The room smelled of paint and turpentine, and her latest project sat unfinished on the easel. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, or if I even had the right to look at all, but something compelled me to open the drawer of her desk. Inside, I found the package. It had been opened, the contents tucked neatly back inside. My hands hovered over it for a moment before I carefully pulled it out. It was a small notebook, its leather cover worn and scuffed. I flipped it open, expecting to find notes about her showcase. Instead, I was met with a series of short entries, written in a handwriting I didn't recognize. The entries were cryptic, filled with phrases like, "Can't stop thinking about her smile," and "Wish we had more time." They were unsigned, but it was clear they weren't Jessica's words. Before I could think too much, I heard the water shut off. My heart raced as I shoved the notebook back into the package and returned it to the drawer. I left the room just as Jessica emerged from the bathroom, her hair wrapped in a towel. "You okay?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Jessica slept soundly beside me. The words that were written in the notebook stuck in my head. The words were personal, and whoever had written them clearly felt something deep for my wife. The question was, did she feel the same? The next morning, I woke up early, unable to shake the weight of what I'd found in that notebook. Jessica was still asleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. I envied her for that calm, but I couldn't bring myself to wake her or even speak to her about it. Not yet. I needed clarity before I could confront her. As the sun broke over the horizon, I made myself a strong cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from the mug. My mind raced with possibilities. Who had written those entries? Were they recent? And, most painfully, had Jessica been responding to them? I decided to focus on what I could control. The notebook wasn't signed, but something told me the name on that package, Ethan Arda, wasn't just a coincidence. I remember Jessica mentioning an artist named Ethan during a showcase a year ago. She'd said he was talented, passionate about his work, and always willing to help others with their projects. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it, but now, it felt like a thread worth pulling. Later that day, after Jessica left for her workshop, I grabbed my laptop and started digging. I didn't know much about Ethan beyond his name and profession, but a quick search brought up his website. It was a sleek, professional page showcasing his paintings and sculptures, along with a schedule of his upcoming exhibits. Scrolling through, I noticed an image of him in one of his galleries. He was tall and well-dressed, with a confident smile that made me feel uneasy. Then I saw it, a small section about his recent collaborations. Jessica's name was listed there, alongside a photo of her helping set up one of his pieces. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. It didn't prove anything. After all, they were both artists, and collaboration was normal. But the timing felt suspicious, especially when paired with the notebook. I closed the laptop and rubbed my temples, trying to think clearly. My instincts told me I wasn't imagining things, but I also didn't want to jump to conclusions. I needed more. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. That evening, Jessica was working late in her art room again, and I noticed she'd left her phone on the kitchen counter. She was usually protective of it, so seeing it unattended gave me pause. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the device. It felt wrong to snoop, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked her phone. She'd never changed the passcode, and opened her messages. Most of the conversations were harmless, filled with exchanges about her students and upcoming art projects. But then I saw a thread with Ethan R. at the top. My chest tightened as I clicked on it. The messages were casual at first, discussing art techniques and gallery logistics. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. "Ethan, last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about it. Jessica." It was wonderful. I needed that. I stopped reading, my vision blurring as anger surged through me. It felt like a punch to the gut, confirming the fears I'd been trying to suppress. I locked her phone and placed it back on the counter, my mind spinning. I wanted to march into her art room and demand answers, but I knew that confronting her in anger wouldn't get me anywhere. I needed to approach this with a clear head, no matter how much it hurt. That night, I barely slept, running through every possible scenario in my mind. I replayed conversations, analyzed her behavior, and questioned every moment we'd spent together in recent months. By morning, one thing was clear. The time for silence was over. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by avoiding the truth. That evening, the house felt quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that settles in when something unspoken hangs heavy in the air. Jessica was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, and I could hear the faint clink of her mug as she stirred her tea absent-mindedly. My mind raced as I replayed everything I had noticed lately. The messages, the changes, the unspoken words between us. I walked into the room, leaning against the counter. "Jess, can we talk?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, though my thoughts were anything but. She glanced up, surprised, before setting her phone down on the counter. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her tone light, though I could sense a slight edge to it. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "I've been feeling like something's been off lately. Between us, I mean." Jessica raised an eyebrow, her expression guarded. "Off? What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I noticed you've been distant. You've been staying late at work, and well, there's this name that keeps coming up. Ethan. Who is he?" Her reaction was subtle but telling, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, quickly masked by a calm exterior. "Ethan? He's just someone I work with. Why are you asking about him?" "Because," I began, my voice firmer now, "you've mentioned him more than anyone else at work. And it's not just that. You've been acting differently, more distracted, more distant. It's like you're keeping something from me." Jessica sighed, crossing her arms. "I'm not keeping anything from you. You think too much about it." Her words stung, not because of what she said, but because of how dismissive she sounded. "Jess, I'm not trying to accuse you of anything. I'm just trying to understand what's going on. I saw the messages, and they weren't exactly the kind of conversations I'd expect between colleagues." Her eyes widened slightly, a mix of defensiveness and unease flashing across her face. "You went through my phone?" she asked, her tone sharp. "I wasn't snooping," I said quickly. "I just happened to see them, and they caught my attention. I needed to know what was going on." She shook her head, her jaw tightening. "Unbelievable. You don't trust me, do you?" "This isn't about trust," I said, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's about clarity. It's about feeling like I'm being shut out while something is happening right in front of me." Jessica turned away, her back to me as she leaned against the counter. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a quieter voice, she murmured, "Ethan and we talk, yes. But it's not what you think. He's just someone I can vent to when work gets overwhelming. That's all it is." Her words hung in the air, and though she tried to sound convincing, there was a hesitation in her voice that I couldn't ignore. "Then why didn't you tell me?" I asked softly. "Why did it feel like you were hiding it?" She turned to face me, her expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Because I knew you'd react like this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I knew you'd make it into something it's not." I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "You don't think I have a right to ask questions when it feels like something is slipping between us?" "Jess, all I wanted was honesty. That's all I've ever wanted." Her eyes dropped to the floor, and for the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. But instead of responding, she simply picked up her tea and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there with the weight of her words pressing down on me. The night stretched on, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was chasing shadows. Jessica's absence from the conversation left me restless, her silence amplifying the questions that were burning in my mind. I could tell she was avoiding me, hiding behind whatever explanation she had conjured up. But deep down, I wasn't buying it. Something wasn't right, and it didn't sit well with me. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, my mind still buzzed with the remnants of last night's conversation. I glanced at the kitchen table where Jessica was sitting, scrolling through her phone, like everything was fine. I knew I couldn't let it go. I needed answers, even if it meant pushing harder. Jess, I began, trying to keep my tone level, but I couldn't mask the edge in my voice. We need to talk about Ethan. I'm not going to drop it. She looked up at me, her eyes narrowing. I thought we were done with this, she said, her voice tinged with annoyance. Why are you so obsessed with him? I'm obsessed with the truth, I said, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. And I'm not getting it from you. Jessica sighed and put her phone down, clearly irritated. You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be, she muttered, her voice quiet but sharp. I'm not, I insisted, my frustration starting to build again. I just don't understand why you're so defensive about it. If there's nothing going on, why can't you just reassure me? Why does this feel so off? She crossed her arms and looked away, a familiar distance creeping into her expression. I don't have to explain myself to you every time something makes you uncomfortable. I'm not doing anything wrong. I clenched my fists at my sides, fighting the urge to yell. But you are, Jess. You are doing something wrong. Not with him, maybe, but with me. We're supposed to be a team. Why do I feel like you've been keeping secrets? For a long time, neither of us spoke. It was like a standoff, one where we both knew the truth was hiding just beyond the surface, but neither of us was ready to fully confront it. I could see the defensive walls building up around her. She wasn't about to admit anything unless I had proof. And then it hit me. I wasn't just asking questions anymore. I was demanding answers. I was done with the guessing games. I went through our bank records last night, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. I saw the payments, thousands of dollars. For dinners, for gifts, stuff I didn't know about. It's not the first time I've noticed things slipping through the cracks, Jess. It's starting to add up. Her face went pale, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The calm facade she'd been holding up started to crumble. I don't know what you think you've found, she said quickly, her voice wavering. But I swear, I didn't do anything wrong. I shook my head slowly, watching her closely. Really? Because it looks like you've been taking money out of our account, Jessica. For what? Dinners with Ethan? Or something else? Her eyes widened, her lips parting as if she was about to say something. But then she closed them, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of my words hanging between us, the reality of the situation sinking in. She was trapped. I'm sorry, she whispered after a long pause, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for things to get this out of hand. That was it. The dam broke. The wall she put up for so long finally came down. You didn't mean for it to get out of hand? I repeated, incredulous. Jess, how much more do you think I should ignore? How much more do I let slide? You've been hiding everything from me. She sat there, shoulders slumped, defeated. I know, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you. I stood there, my heart torn in two. Her apology felt hollow, like a last-ditch effort to salvage something that had already been shattered. The trust was gone, and no amount of words could fix that. I don't know what to do anymore, Jess, I said, my voice breaking. I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's so clearly not. The silence between us was deafening. I stared at Jessica, trying to process what was happening, trying to make sense of everything she had just admitted. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. We both knew this was it. Whatever we had left was slipping through our fingers, and neither of us could stop it. I wanted to yell. I wanted to scream. All this anger that had been building up, all the frustration of not knowing what was going on, it was finally spilling over. But instead, I just stood there, numb, unsure of what to do next. I was angry, yes, but I was also broken. This was not the future I had imagined. This wasn't what I had worked so hard for. You don't get it, do you? Jessica's voice was soft, but there was a coldness in it now, something that wasn't there before. She leaned back against the couch, arms crossed, avoiding my eyes. I didn't know what she was talking about. I couldn't even understand how we got here. What do you mean? I asked, my words strained, filled with disbelief. You've been lying to me, taking money, doing God knows what with him, and now you're telling me you didn't mean to hurt me? That's not an excuse, Jessica. That's not enough. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. There was no apology in them, no remorse, just something different, something final. I didn't want to hurt you, but I did. And I don't think I can fix it anymore, she said, her voice shaking slightly, but it wasn't from guilt. I don't love you anymore, okay? I haven't for a long time. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I staggered back, my mind racing to make sense of what she had just said. The woman I had loved for so long, the woman I thought I knew inside and out, was telling me that everything we had was a lie. The love, the shared memories, the plans we had for the future, it all meant nothing now. I'm sorry, she whispered, her face showing the faintest trace of sadness, but it didn't feel like the apology I was expecting. It felt more like an explanation. I know this is going to hurt you, but I can't keep pretending. I can't keep pretending that I feel something I don't. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What could I say? What was left to say? How do you even begin to process something like this? How do you wrap your head around the fact that the person you thought you knew better than anyone else doesn't feel the same about you anymore? Are you serious? I finally managed to ask, my voice hoarse. It was the only question I could ask, though it felt useless in the face of her honesty. I am, she said quietly, her voice trembling with the weight of her decision. I know it's selfish, but I can't keep lying to you. I don't love you anymore, and I think it's time for both of us to move on. I stood there, completely frozen, as the reality of her words settled in. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, but the pain wasn't physical. It was something deeper, something that cut through everything I had ever known about our relationship. The truth I had been desperately searching for all this time was more than I could handle. I thought about the years we had spent together, the good times, the laughter, the intimacy. All of it was slipping through my fingers, like sand in the wind. Everything I thought was solid was now shattered. So that's it? I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. You've made up your mind? You're just done with me? Jessica didn't respond immediately. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with sadness, but also something else, something that was foreign to me. It was as if the woman I had known was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. I never wanted it to end like this, she finally said, her voice quiet, almost pleading. But it's already been ending for a long time, and I've just been too afraid to face it. I took a step back, my chest tightening. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. There were 1,000 things I wanted to say, 1,000 questions left unanswered, but in that moment, I knew there was no point. The truth had come crashing down, and nothing was going to change it now. The marriage, the love, it was all gone. So this is it? I whispered again, more to myself than to her. We're really done? Yeah, she said softly. We're done. The words hung in the air, final and unyielding. I looked at her, standing there like a stranger, and something inside me broke for the last time. I turned and walked away, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. As I stepped out of the door, I could feel the weight of everything I had lost. But I also knew, deep down, that this was the beginning of something else. I wasn't sure what that would look like yet, but I was going to have to figure it out on my own. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of relief.